I practiced estate law for 35 years. In that time, I helped thousands of families plan for the transfer of everything they had. Built their homes, their savings, their businesses, the accumulated material evidence of their lives. I was good at my job. I still believe that. But there is one thing I did regularly in the first 15 years of my practice that I stopped doing in the 16th. And I stopped because of a woman named Dorothy who came into my office on a Thursday afternoon in October and sat across from my desk and told me very quietly what had happened to her. I am going to tell you Dorothy's story today, and then I am going to tell you the other stories, the ones that confirmed what Dorothy taught me, the pattern I should have seen earlier, the mistake that is made every single day by well-meaning people with good intentions that leaves parents financially vulnerable and families permanently damaged. The mistake is this: signing your home over to your children before you die. It sounds generous, it sounds practical, it sounds like good planning. It is almost never any of those things. I stopped facilitating it in 1994. I have not facilitated it since. And today I am going to tell you exactly why, who I am, and why I know this. I retired from practice 3 years ago at 72. I spent 35 years as an estate attorney in private practice. Wills, trusts, powers of attorney, probate, the full spectrum of what happens to everything a person owns when they are no longer able to manage it or when they die. I was not a wealthy person's lawyer. I was a middle-class person's lawyer. The people who came to me had houses and modest savings and children they loved and complicated feelings about all of it. That combination, a house, children, love, and complicated feelings, is the exact combination that makes this particular mistake so common and so destructive. I facilitated it many times in the early years of my practice because my clients wanted it, and because the immediate legal transaction itself is straightforward, and because I was not yet experienced enough to see what happened 5 and 10 years down the road. Dorothy taught me to see down the road. Let me tell you what she told me. Dorothy, the story that changed how I practice. Dorothy was 79 when she came to see me. She had transferred her home to her son and daughter-in-law 4 years earlier, at 75, in good health, with the best of intentions. The reasons were the ones I had heard dozens of times. She wanted to avoid probate. She wanted to simplify things for her children when the time came. She wanted to make sure the house went where she intended, and not to the government or to a process that might be contested. Her son had suggested it. She had thought it was a good idea. She had gone to a lawyer, not me, who had drawn up the deed transfer without what I would consider adequate counsel about the consequences. And then, 4 years later, her son's marriage broke down. The divorce proceedings included as marital assets the home that Dorothy had transferred, a home she still lived in, a home that now appeared in legal terms to belong equally to her son and a woman Dorothy had barely known before the marriage, and did not know well now. The divorce settlement required the home to be sold. Dorothy came to me to ask if there was anything she could do. She was 79. She had no other significant assets. The home had been her only real financial security, and it was no longer hers. I sat with her for 2 hours. I told her the truth, which was that her options were extremely limited. The transfer had been legally clean. The divorce proceedings were treating the asset appropriately under the law. There was very little I could do. She was not angry. That was the part that stayed with me longest. She was not angry. She was bewildered. She said I did this to help my son. I did not understand that I was also doing it to myself. I have heard some version of that sentence in every case like this that I have encountered since. I did not understand what I was also doing to myself. The 5 things that can go wrong and regularly do. After Dorothy, I began paying different attention to what happened in the years after these. Transfers. Not just the legal transaction, the life that followed it. I identified 5 categories of disaster. 5 things that can go wrong when a parent transfers their home to a child while still living in it. All 5 are common. All 5 are foreseeable. Almost none of them are foreseen at the time of transfer. The first is divorce. Dorothy's story. The child's marriage breaks down and the home becomes a marital asset subject to division. The parent loses their home to a settlement in a marriage they had nothing to do with. The second is debt. The child encounters financial difficulties, a failed business, a lawsuit, a period of unemployment, and creditors have a claim against their assets. If the home is in the child's name, it may be reachable by those creditors. I have seen parents lose homes to their child's bankruptcy. The third is death. The child dies before the parent. The home, now in the child's name, passes through the child's estate, which may go to the child's spouse or the child's children, or through a will that the parent had no part in making. The parent may find themselves living in a home that now legally belongs to their grandchildren, or a daughter-in-law with whom their relationship was never uncomplicated. The fourth is relationship breakdown. The parent and child have a falling out. It happens. Families are complicated and time is long and people change. The parent is now living in a home they no longer own, in a relationship with the person who owns it that has deteriorated. The leverage in that relationship has shifted permanently and irrevocably. The fifth is changed circumstance. The parent's needs change. They require care that would be funded by Medicaid or its equivalent in their country. But the transfer of the home has affected their eligibility, the look-back periods that govern asset transfers for. Long-term care purposes mean that a transfer made with the best of intentions can leave a parent ineligible for the public assistance they need precisely when they need it most. 5 categories, all foreseeable, almost never foreseen. I stopped facilitating these transfers when I could see all 5 clearly, when I could look at the family sitting across my desk, loving, well-intentioned, entirely certain this was sensible planning, and see the specific disaster that was most likely to find them 5 or 10 years down the road. The 3 cases that confirmed what Dorothy taught me. In the years after Dorothy, I tracked what happened to the families who had done these. Transfers before they came to me. Families I encountered in probate, in estate disputes, in the messy aftermath of decisions made with clean intentions. 3 cases have stayed with me. The first was a man named Gerald who transferred his home to his eldest son at 73. Gerald lived to 91. For the last 8 years of his life, his relationship with his son had deteriorated significantly. A combination of the son's financial pressures, Gerald's increasing care needs, and the specific resentment that accumulates in relationships, where the power has shifted and both parties feel it. Gerald spent his last years living in his son's house, which is to say, in his own former house, with the particular diminishment of a man who had given away his greatest asset and could not take it back. He had no leverage. He had no independence in the financial sense. He was dependent on a relationship that had become genuinely difficult. Gerald told me when I encountered him late in that period, I thought I was giving him something. I did not understand I was also giving away the ability to leave. The ability to leave. He meant not that he wanted to leave, but that he no longer had the choice. The home was not his. The resources were not his. His options had narrowed to what his son decided to offer. The second case was a woman named Patricia, whose daughter died unexpectedly at 54. Patricia was 81. The home Patricia had transferred to her daughter passed through her. Daughter's estate to her daughter's husband, a man Patricia had a civil, but not warm, relationship with, and whose relationship with her daughter had been more complicated than anyone had acknowledged publicly. Patricia came to me at 81 trying to understand her rights to the home she had lived in for 40 years, the home she had owned for 40 years, the home she had given to a daughter who was now gone. Her rights were limited. The home was legally someone else's. The third case I will not describe in detail because it involved allegations that were never fully resolved. But the pattern was the one I had come to recognize. A parent who had transferred their home in a spirit of generosity, who had remained in it as a resident but not an owner, and whose ability to protect themselves from the specific dynamics that developed in that household was severely compromised by the absence of legal ownership. After 3 cases, the pattern was unmistakable. After 30, it was beyond argument. What I did instead, and what actually works. What I want every adult child to hear. I have spent most of this conversation talking to parents. I want to spend a moment talking to their children. If you have suggested to your parent that they transfer their home to you, or if your parent has suggested it and you have agreed, I want you to hear this directly. Your parent's home is their last significant asset of financial independence. It is the thing that if everything else went wrong, they could sell or borrow against or use to fund their own care. It is the physical expression of everything they built. When they transfer it to you, they are not just giving you something valuable. They are removing from themselves something irreplaceable. Not the home, the security the home represents, the options it holds open, the independence it protects. You may be entirely trustworthy. You may have the best intentions. You may be certain that your marriage is stable, your finances are sound, your relationship with your parent will never deteriorate, and that you will die after your parent and not before. None of these things are within your control. The right thing to do, if you want to help your parent plan, if you want to reduce the burden on their estate, if you want to make sure their assets go where they intend, is to take them to an estate attorney and build a plan that protects both of you, not a plan that transfers their security to you, a plan that preserves their security while also achieving the planning goals you share. That plan exists. It costs a few $1,000s. It does not require your parent to give you anything before they die. It requires only that you love them enough to protect them while you're protecting their estate. 35 years, thousands of families. One mistake that I watched destroy more of them than almost anything else I encountered in a long practice. Do not sign your home over to your children before you die. Not because your children are untrustworthy, not because the intention is wrong, because you cannot predict the future, because marriages fail and businesses fail and people die in the wrong order and relationships change in ways that nobody anticipates, because the home you live in is not just a building. It is the last significant guarantor of your independence. And independence at 75 or 80 or 85 is not something you can afford to give away for reasons that feel practical today and may be catastrophic tomorrow. Do the trust instead. See a qualified estate attorney. Build a plan that achieves everything you want to achieve without requiring you to hand over the thing that protects you. Dorothy taught me this in October of 1994. I have never forgotten her. I hope she would be glad that I am still saying it. I'll see you in the next one.